Hi, my name's Scott Shepard, and I'm out here at beautiful Wilder Ranch State Park celebrating the first day of the very first annual California State Parks Week. And we're gathering together here today at Wilder Ranch to celebrate Land Acknowledgement Day. A land acknowledgement is an opportunity for us as an organization to recognize the stewards of this land since time immemorial. We recognize as California State Parks that all land in California and in the United States is Indigenous land and has been cared for, protected, and stewarded by Indigenous people since time immemorial. I'd love for you to join with me today out here at Wilder Ranch as we get to know some of the community partners that are helping us to celebrate Land Acknowledgement Day and helping us to restore a more sustainable future. So come along with me. So we're lucky enough to be joined here today by the Amah Mutsun Land Trust, and I'd love to introduce you to some of our partners who are out here representing the Amah Mutsun Land Trust today. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, good morning. My name is Isak Ordonez, and I'm a proud member of the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band and Land Trust.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about what the Amah Mutsun Land Trust does and who the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band is.
So the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band is a small group of about a couple hundred Native Americans scattered around the state. The Land Trust is a group that was recently made around 2011, I want to say, and we have this goal of protecting Mother Earth and all living things. In order to do so, we have been working up Highway 1 on Kyoto State lands to restore a coastal prairie to its original state. Doing so, we have been using fire mounds, prescribed burns, and we now have a greenhouse to reintroduce native plants and grasses.
Excellent. So can you tell me a little bit more about the practice of prescribed burns and how it engages with the land here in the state of California?
Absolutely. So fire goes back thousands of years with our native history and heritage. It is a practice that we have used to mitigate the lands for many years, to keep the biodiversity nice and fresh, to keep all the fuel and litter down, and to also help out the animals because they live there too.
Excellent. Right on. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. And I'm going to continue moving along, but I'd love for you to stay engaged with us in the conversation.
Absolutely.
So can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Marcela Luna. I am the Administrative Specialist for the Amah Mutsun Land Trust Native Stewardship Corps. I am a tribal member, tribal council member, and I am boots on the ground with the Native Stewardship Corps.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about what you're working on here.
Yeah, so we're working today with dogbane. It's a woody vegetation, and we are making cordage, and I'm looking to make a bracelet with it. And it is very important to us. The Native Stewardship Corps is also a relearning program of our culture and traditions. And thanks to our ancestors, we are, it's very important to us to learn how they lived and what they left for us. And we are thankful. And yeah.
Awesome. So we were just talking a little bit about prescribed burns. So it sounds like you're engaging not only in prescribed burns as a way to restore the land back to its original state, but also as a way to restore a relationship with the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band members and the land itself. So can you tell me a little bit more about what it means to be a part of that effort? Either one of you are welcome to share.
We feel very proud to be part of this effort. It's a brand new thing, so we're all kind of learning as we go, but we've been graced by CAL FIRE and other groups to help us kind of guide her along the path and to do it in a traditional and traditional way.
Awesome. And what are some of the other cultural practices that the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band is trying to bring back to your community and to this area?
Yes, our ancestors burned for thousands of years to manage the land. Fire is sacred to our Indigenous peoples for ceremony, cooking, to stay warm, and so many other things. And we are grateful to be part of bringing fire back to the land, and thankful to state parks for partnering and having us with them to put the fire on the ground and to manage the land better.
Well, I can say as a member of California State Parks that we're incredibly grateful to have your community as partners in our effort to create a more sustainable future. And we're also incredibly grateful to have you here with us today celebrating Land Acknowledgement Day. So just thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So let's keep moving along. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Bryce Elgin. I come from the Dry Creek Band of Pomo Indians, north in Santa Rosa, north of that even a little bit. Mehilakana is what the name of our language and tribe is to our peoples.
Excellent. So it sounds like this particular area wasn't just home to one particular group of people. It sounds like it was home to a variety of cultures. Can you tell me a little bit more about the culture that you're representing here today?
Definitely. So throughout California, there were hundreds of tribes. Alone in just my area, I know that there are 19 versions or bands of Pomo Indians, and that's in a pretty small area. So a lot of these names of the tribes aren't known about. They're just known about more of the broader names. So that's where it's fun to do my own research and ask people who are wiser than me and older than me about the different names and of those tribes.
So can you tell me a little bit more about like what research you're engaging in and how you're engaging in that practice?
Well, it's pretty archival, to be honest. You kind of have to go back and ask people. Some of these things that we can learn about come through books and come through school, but the real knowledge is learned from the elders.
Excellent. Right on. Well, thank you so much for coming and joining us here today from your community and representing your community here at Land Acknowledgement Day.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's continue on. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Gabriel Pineda. I'm a Native Steward, also a tribal member, and I'm the field specialist for the Native Stewardship Land Trust Court, Stewardship Court.
So you mentioned that you're the field specialist. Can you tell me a little bit more about what a field specialist does and your work as a part of this community?
My job titles, we focus on being out in the field is like field specialist. I kind of like run the crew out there. Like, you mean, they give us a task, like if we're gonna go take out like those hemlock over there, invasive hemlock, so we'll do that all day, but then we'll also take account of how much is there, that how much is that we're pulling out of the ground, just so we can get to like an estimated count and how much area, whatever space is. I got to write all that down. And my job basically is just being out here, just even learning the plants, just learning what my ancestors did was just, take care of the land and, getting to stay connected with the land.
Awesome. So what does it mean to you to be really engaging in that learning process?
It means a lot. It means, because I come from a town or a city where it's just, it's mostly like grapevines and like orchards, but just coming out here and being around the ocean, being around like redwoods, the forest, it's just great. I don't know. There's no words to explain how it feels. This feels great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it feels great to have you folks as a member of, our community here in Santa Cruz District. And we're just incredibly lucky to be supported by your organization and so many other organizations like yours. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
So let's continue on. I'd love to introduce you to our district's archaeologist, Mike Groen. So Mike, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be out here today.
Awesome. So Mike, can you tell me a little bit more about your work that you engage in with California State Parks?
Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm the district archaeologist for Santa Cruz Parks, and prior to coming on 6 months ago, I was working with the Amah Mutsun Land Trust as a tribal archaeologist and consultant, kind of looking at, as mentioned, how to apply ancient traditional management practices, whether that's fire or stewardship of marine resources like shellfish and small fish, how to apply that ancient knowledge that's in the archaeological record, that's living in memory of indigenous people and elders, as previously acknowledged, and also that we're kind of rediscovering and relearning today, and how to use that deep time perspective to learn lessons from the past, apply them to the present, and sculpt a more resilient and inclusive future.
And Mike, I've heard you mention a few times, this concept of deep time. So can you tell me a little bit more about like what your role as an archaeologist really does in relation to that concept?
Yeah, so I think about deep time sometimes, in an ecological sense, and we're looking at baselines of change from like the observations of the past few decades as being fairly limited, in terms of understanding how to better steward and manage resources. But having a perspective that spans thousands of years, which is the perspective that tribal people have in California, thousands and thousands of years of relationship with natural resources, that is evidence in archaeological sites in our area and throughout the state and country, that have records of people's relationships with place, people's relationships with each other, and especially people's relationships with the land. And through archaeological research, you can see patterns through time that evidence different management practices, resource use practices, and in some cases stewardship of certain resources to make them more productive. When you start to see those trends over big ranges of time, I think that can help prepare us to better address the current issues we're facing, whether it's climate, erosion, loss of biodiversity, and equally important, separation of identity from people who have spent whose ancestors were here for thousands and thousands of years. So it's archaeology focuses on the past, but I think it has a lot of links to the present and also can give us lessons for how to make a better future.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing so much on that, Mike. And you mentioned relationships. I think as interpreters, we're really trying to always emphasize those relationships, not just with visitors, but with community members, with partners. And it's great to see that spans across so many different program areas in California state parks, and that we're, all working together to restore and rebuild relationships that in some cases have been broken and in some cases have been diminished. So we really appreciate your work.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to still be here. Now that I've moved from working full-time with Amah Mutsun Land Trust and taking a role at parks, I feel like I'm still trying to work as much as I can with Amah Mutsun Land Trust and facilitate the relationship so that state agencies and tribal agencies can have, budding relationships that have really successful, cool, integrative outcomes for years to come. So I'm happy to be where I am.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Mike. Keep coming along with me this way, and we're going to get to know Jenny Daly, who's our curator here for the Santa Cruz District. So Jenny, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about your role in the district and what some of the work that you do here focuses on?
Yeah, so I'm the museum curator for the whole district, which means I help manage the historic artifact collections at our various historic parks. So that includes Wilder Ranch here, but also Pigeon Point, the Santa Cruz Mission, Henry Cowell, Seacliff, these parks that have a museum collection. So I help manage those, and that also includes our archaeology collections too. We have an archaeology facility at our district headquarters, and I just help do, inventories, collections care, gift donations, and a little bit of exhibit design as well.
Awesome. So can you tell me a little bit about how your role relates to what it is that we're focusing on here today on Land Acknowledgement Day?
Yeah, so, here at Wilder we have a lot of museum collections. Actually, this is the park in our district that has the most collections. And a lot of that's the historic material that is material related to the Wilder family. But we do have older collections that have been acquired through various field school excavations here at the park. State Parks has some good partnerships with UC Santa Cruz and Cabrillo College to do some archaeology work. And so we have archaeological collections from Wilder Ranch stored in our archaeology facility at Felton. And then also quite a bit of material is up in Sacramento as well at the statewide collection storage facility. And I think part of my role is helping to make those collections more accessible to Mike or to Martin, to the people doing the research from the materials.
Awesome. So you mentioned a couple different things. You mentioned access, and you also mentioned your role as a museum curator. So I'm just curious, how do you feel like your work helps to support equitable access for the public to engage with the natural, cultural, and historic resources of our parks?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have goals to make the collections more accessible statewide in general. We have this database, where in theory everything is recorded in the database, and so I think there's a goal to make parts of that database online, so you could go to the state parks website and maybe search for certain types of materials. I don't think we're quite there yet. There's a little bit of behind the scenes back end work to clean up some of that data, but that's a goal. I think anyone who wants to actually access the collections in person and physically go through the material, they can reach out to me or Martin or Mike, and we can make an appointment to view that material as well. In addition to the objects, we have a lot of records too, so if people want to come and look at some of our site records and get a better sense of some of that information, we're open and available for that kind of work too.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks so much for sharing. And I just want to ask as well, what inspires you to do your work as a museum curator here with California State Parks?
Well, I love museums. I was an intern as an undergrad at an anthropology museum, and I was like, what? There's a job where you can just keep things organized at a museum, sign me up. And so I worked in more traditional museums for a really long time, but I was really drawn to the state parks job because it's a very unique position, and it's a chance to work in a park, but then also care for our collections, which are, since we work for state parks, they're all of our collections too. So to be able to manage our collections for posterity is a great thing to do.
That's awesome. And you mentioned, these are all of our state parks. These are all of our resources, and that we all have access to these amazing places. And I think that we share, everyone who works with California State Parks, this inspiration to care for and protect the natural, cultural, and historic resources of our state. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that you do for our district, and thank you for the work that you do for California State Parks.
Pleasure.
Welcome back. This is Scott Shepard here out at Wilder Ranch State Park celebrating Land Acknowledgement Day on the first day of the first annual California State Parks Week. And I'd love to introduce you to our district historian and tribal liaison here in Santa Cruz, Martin Rizzo Martinez. So Martin, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Hey, thanks, Scott. It's my pleasure. Yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah, so Martin, can you tell me a little bit about what you do for the district in your role and kind of some of the work that we're doing here in Santa Cruz on Land Acknowledgement Day?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm the historian here for Santa Cruz District State Parks and the tribal liaison. And so, what that involves is basically kind of taking care of our cultural resources and really kind of trying to bring forth histories. And in particular, we're here on Land Acknowledgement Day. It's important to note that Native histories have often been ignored or kind of erased from a lot of the histories in California. And so that's one thing that's really important for us is to make sure that we're bringing that back and that we're recognizing Native histories in our parks. Of course, every park is on Native land. We're here at Wilder Ranch. Wilder Ranch is actually part of an old village system, possibly called Ho-Truk-Tak from the 1700s. And so before this became a ranch and dairy industry, of course, this was Native land. And that's the same thing, of course, with all of our parks. So I think it's important that we recognize land acknowledgements because we are all on Native lands, of course, here in California and elsewhere too. But I think that's really what we're trying to do here is to recognize the indigenous histories that have been here and that continue through, and into the future as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that's a really good point. You bring up a lot of good points, but can you tell me a little bit more about what exactly is a land acknowledgement and why is it important for us to go through that process?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I think there's land acknowledgements are kind of new, and I think that there's a lot of good critiques in them as well. I should note that we want to make sure it's very easy for land acknowledgements to be performative or to be kind of just symbolic and not really have much meaning. And I think it has to go beyond that, right? It's one thing we want to acknowledge that these are native lands. I think it's also, as a historian, it's also really important to note that there's a reason why native peoples do not have all their lands, and this has to do with a couple centuries of colonial violence, disruption, the mission system that forcibly removed people and relocated them away from their traditional lands. So there's a history of legacy of violence in our states in particular that is kind of gets us to where we are today. So I think we have to understand the history of how we got here today to really have a better understanding of where we're at and where we're going forward. But I think ultimately land acknowledgements, we want to do that. We want to acknowledge the histories of these lands. We want to acknowledge why they've shifted and why Native peoples are no longer here. But we also want to recognize the persistence of Native communities here today, which you're seeing here with some of the interviews you did earlier here with some of our Native partners who are out here as well.
Awesome. So similar to the questions that I asked Jenny, who's our museum curator here for the district, I'd love to ask you what really inspires you in your work as a historian and a tribal liaison?
So yeah, that's a good question. So to be perfectly honest, it has to do with personal history. My family came from New Mexico. I learned as a little kid about my own family's kind of mixed blood Native colonial history. We go back hundreds of years on one side, thousands on the other. So I always kind of grew up interested in understanding history a little bit better and understanding colonial history and indigenous histories more. So it's always been an interest of mine. I moved up to Santa Cruz area and started asking questions, trying to better understand Native history and like the early stories here. And so that kind of drove me to go into school. I'm a first generation college graduate, so I kind of decided to pursue interests is what led me to do that and eventually get my doctorate. And then eventually I did write this book that came out just the last couple months. We Are Not Animals, which is the history of indigenous peoples in the Santa Cruz area. So those are all kind of driven by, I guess, my own questions, trying to understand my own history, my own family history, and understand kind of colonialism and all of those types of things. So it's kind of comes out of a personal interest, but I also think that wherever we live, we want to, people need to understand the histories of those lands, right? We live in a beautiful place, which is great, but whose land is it that we're on, right? I think it's really important to be recognizing for anyone to look at the place you live and to think like, whose land am I on? Where are those people today? What are they doing? Where are they at? And how can we work in solidarity with indigenous communities wherever you're at?
Thank you, Martin, for that. And you mentioned this book that you've just published.
Sure.
First, congratulations.
Thank you.
But also, where can we find this book? How can we buy a copy of it? And can you tell us a little bit more about what we'll learn as we're reading?
Sure. Yeah. So you can find it. We have it in the parks in Santa Cruz. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it locally at booksellers here in Santa Cruz. Friends of Santa Cruz State Parks is actually selling a discounted copy online. So if you looked it up, We Are Not Animals, Rizzo Martinez, online, you can find it there. What will we learn from it? So, what you're going to learn in this, the book really, first of all, I'll note that the foreword was written by the Amah Mutsun tribal chairman, Valentin Lopez, who wrote a really beautiful foreword to this. The book, I really focus here on indigenous or stories of resistance and rebellion. I think in California, first of all, people don't understand indigenous histories very much at all. We're not really taught those. We're often taught that the histories start with the missions. And so I think it's really important to go beyond that. But what I found when I was looking into the research is that you can really understand this story as the story of how people fought back, how people challenged different colonial regimes, whether they're Spanish, Mexican, and then eventually the American era, which was outright policies of genocide. But I really focused on the individual stories of, families and individuals who fought back and looked at the ways that they did, the ways that Native peoples learned from each other's and created, developed strategies of resistance and ways to kind of persevere and keep their culture alive. And I think that's important because we're seeing that still today. And what you're saying with the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band and the land stewards is exactly that. It's people today who are reclaiming their culture and who are, you know, fighting to, you know, to keep these things alive and to pass them on to next generations. So I think that that's a continuous history of, you know, of strength and resilience and ingenuity that Indigenous peoples have had and continue to have. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Martin. And you heard it here. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on our state parks websites, in our state parks all across the district. And Friends of Santa Cruz is providing a discounted copy on their website. So that is a really good segue, Martin, because Friends of Santa Cruz is one of our cooperating organizations here in the district, which is a nonprofit affiliate organization that helps to support the work that we do in California state parks. And we are lucky enough to have many, many of those. And we have 3 official sponsors of California State Parks Week, all the events that are happening statewide over the course of this week. And those are Parks California, California State Parks Foundation, and Save the Redwoods League. And we're lucky enough to be joined by Joanna Nelson from Save the Redwoods League. So Joanna Nelson, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So can you tell us a little more about the Save the Redwoods League and what it is that your organization does?
Save the Redwoods League was founded over 100 years ago in 1918, and the mission is to protect and restore the redwoods. So that's coast redwoods throughout their range and giant sequoia, and to connect people to the beauty and awe of the redwoods.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's obvious that we have a shared mission in connecting people with the beauty and awe of the natural resources of our California state parks, but also our public spaces all across the state of California. So thank you so much for the work that you do. So you mentioned a little bit earlier as we were chatting that you would be interested in providing a land acknowledgement on this very first Land Acknowledgement Day of the first California State Parks Week. So I'd love to give you the opportunity to do that here today.
Thank you so much. So as somebody non-Indigenous who lives in Santa Cruz and also works at Save the Redwoods League, it's important to me to use land acknowledgements as an acknowledgement of where we are and whose traditional territory we're on, and also to make a commitment about what needs to happen for Indigenous stewards to be on their lands. So right now, we are on the unceded land of the Awaswas-speaking Weepi tribe, where the closest living descendants are the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. And I recognize that everybody who lives here in Santa Cruz benefits from living, working, and being on these lands. And again, I'd like to say what a privilege it is. So Save the Redwoods League is here as a partner and collaborator both with California State Parks and with the Amah Mutsun Land Trust. And I'd love it if Dr. Rizzo Martinez could add anything more specific to Wilder Ranch State Park, but that's the land acknowledgement that we use when I'm at University of California, Santa Cruz, when I'm at any meetings of my children's schools. So it's a practice professionally and personally.
Thank you so much for that, Joanna. And then Martin, anything to add?
I think that covered it really well. Yeah, I mean, I think I said it before, but I think it's worth noting, since we're here at Wilder, that, you know, the Wilder was part of the territory of the Weepi people, you know, at the time, going back hundreds of years here. And this was, again, a village site. Possibly Hotroktak was one of the areas here. So far beyond when it was became a dairy farm and all these other histories to it. You know, this, of course, started going back as Native people from this area say since time immemorial. These have been native lands.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Martin, and thank you so much, Joanna, for being here today, not only as a representative of Save the Redwoods League, but as a Santa Cruz community member and as, you know, a partner of California State Parks.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So I'd love to just say thank you to everybody who's watching at home today for joining us for Land Acknowledgement Day on the first day of the first annual California State Parks Week. We are so lucky as California State Parks to care for and protect amazing places like Wilder Ranch, where I'm standing here today. And I look forward to continuing to steward these amazing natural, cultural, and historic resources of our state, and continuing to restore a positive relationship with Indigenous people all across the state of California. So thanks again, and we hope to see you in a California State Park really soon. See you later.